Welcome to Belling History with the Good Time Girls, a hyper-local podcast about the quirky history of Bellingham, Washington, and the fourth corner of the United States. Even though we like to keep things close to home, these stories are no less entertaining to the masses and those who find themselves, unfortunately, outside the PNW. We are your hosts. I'm Colby.
And I'm Ren. And today's episode is called Leopold's Ghost, the History of the Hotel Leo, Part 1. We're doing this one about the Leo. If you didn't know, it's a lovely historic hotel in downtown Bellingham on Cornwall Avenue. It is where we have been starting and ending many of our downtown tours the past couple of years.
Yes, we love partnering with the Leo downtown because we get to show off their beautiful historic building to lots of people, whether they're staying in the hotel or staying somewhere else, or they are recent transplants. People are always excited to see it. Even folks who have lived here for a while often haven't been inside since it transitioned back into a hotel, as for many years it was a retirement home.
I definitely remember when it was the retirement home, taking my kids there trick-or-treating for the downtown trick-or-treat. You could go in and all the sweet little patrons of the Leo would have little candy for them. It was very sweet.
Yeah, it was always my dream to retire there.
That's right. We might still. Just me and Colby in a one bedroom.
Yeah.
With a kitchenette.
Totally.
If you need us in 20 years, you'll know where to find us.
Way up in the Leopold.
All right. Well, today we're going to talk about some of the earliest history behind the hotel, starting back in 1889. And because it's October, we're going to lean into some of the spookier stories for this episode. And then next month, in part 2, we're going to cover the Roaring 20s and the New Tower, the glamour years on up through today, which you guys won't want to miss. That's some of the coolest history I think our town has to offer. There's a lot of stuff that took place at the Leo.
I was like, I think we're going to need 2 episodes.
Yeah, we are. I'm stoked. All right, so we're going to get into the history of the hotel and the property, which has gone through many changes over the years, Colby.
So the current Hotel Leo, what we think of as the hotel, is on Cornwall Avenue today between Holly and Chestnut. And the current main building was built in the late 1920s, and that was at the time a new tall tower for an already existing version of the hotel. Today, the upper stories in that building are condominiums, and then there are 2 stories used for the hotel, which also extends out into a mid-century wing to the west. That was constructed in the late 60s on the site of the older hotel building. So we'll get into that. I call that one the Twin Towers. It used to be there. It was kind of U-shaped.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll put some historic photos of that in our show notes. So that one had been built in 1914, replacing an even earlier incarnation. So we're going to go all the way back to that one, the Byron House. It's complicated. And I think it's interesting because hotels are always sort of facing that challenge to stay fresh and competitive and necessarily kind of undergo a lot of changes in order to stay in the game. So a lot of them, as they age, if they're not renovated, they'll just become, cheaper rooming houses as newer hotels with more amenities come on the scene. Or they get torn down, or they might get repurposed into a different use, which also happened with the Leopold. But it is kind of interesting for an older hotel to survive long enough to then have its oldness become appreciated again and to be reused again as a hotel. So we're seeing that, I think, more and more, but I think it's pretty cool.
This is super cool. Yeah. All right. So every hotel has its share of deaths. Just a given. It's bound to happen sooner or later. And the Byron/Leo has its fair share. We're going to get to in some of the more interesting ones in this podcast. And again, we're not ghost experts, y'all, but it seems a general ghost belief that sometimes when people die in a place, they might then haunt that place for one reason or another. Again, we don't claim to know why, but it's a ghost trope. So given that, let's just say that the Leo has a lot of potential ghosts in it. And don't get us wrong, we like to lean into this idea. We're not opposed. And the Leo likes to lean into it as well. And you'll see this statement on the Leo's website today saying, "We'd like to make plain that if the Hotel Leo is haunted, the spirits doing the haunting mean no harm. Though we've had some encounters that are difficult to explain, none of them have been creepy or frightening. We'd go as far as to say that we wouldn't mind meeting our guests from the great beyond, should they exist, and hearing the stories they've stayed behind to tell. After all, part of our mission as stewards of this building is to honor its history, no matter what form that history might take." Pretty cute.
Yes, let's get into it. Before we had the Leopold Hotel, we had that precursor called the Byron House, this kind of pioneer era hotel. So that was built in 1889. And once again, we're in our boom time era here in Bellingham Bay when the railroads were about to arrive, bringing thousands of non-Indigenous people to the area who will all need places to stay. And the housing crunch at that time was pretty intense. You constantly read in the newspapers about, the need for more lodging and housing. Buildings just couldn't go up fast enough to meet demand. So a hotel seems like a pretty good bet in terms of a money-making business plan for the time. And so we had in 1889 still the four towns around Bellingham Bay. We had Seaholm and Whatcom as kind of the main contenders that were gradually growing together to what we think of as downtown Bellingham today. And then we still had over on the south side the little original Bellingham and the newly upstart rising up of the town of Fairhaven, which sprang up super quickly and gave Seaholm/Whatcom/New Whatcom a run for their money, at least for a couple years before the boom went bust. But in these early days, in all these little towns, you had just some really basic hotels, mostly just a couple rooms over a saloon. Like Dirty Dan had his hotel over in Fairhaven, where you were lucky to get anything clean. You had the Whatcom House and the Terminus Hotel in Whatcom. And there's some fun descriptions by people like Ella Higginson about arriving in town and showing up to one of these establishments. And there's a saloon with drunk dudes fighting and blood-curdling screams. And she's going where the hell have I come to? But so it's in that atmosphere that you start to get these first larger multi-story hotels being built. There was first the Seaholm Hotel, which was right where the roundabout is today at State Street going on down the boulevard. You had Beck's Grand View Hotel. Had a saloon on the corner. That's right where the B&B Bank building is on Holly and Cornwall today. And so just up the street from the Byron. And then coming in hot, you had the Bellingham Hotel, an opera house built by John Stenger, who was just outshining his brother's little saloon style hotel across the street. That would have been where Structures Brewery is today. So these were all kind of wood frame. They couldn't really be taller than 3 stories because they were wood and you had fire danger. And also you had a lack of elevators, but they were doing booming business and they were full and people often had a hard time finding rooms. So, and then the same year, ground is being broken and plans laid for kind of the cursed hotels. I like to think of them, the Grand Central in Whatcom and then the Fairhaven Hotel, neither of which would open until the next year. And then they kind of overshot the mark because then we had this sort of boom going bust. By the time these fancy ones got built, they were kind of struggling. But at any rate, the Byron was right there and the timing was good and the location on Dock Street was good. It leads right to the wharf. So I'm saying Dock Street, that's Cornwall Avenue, and it went to the dock. And that was, one of the main offloading points for people arriving on steamers, which was the only way to get there until the railroads showed up. So we've got this guy, Captain J.L. Byron. He came to town and built this hotel and named it after himself. It's going to be a trend. So Captain John Leon Byron, he's born in 1848 in New York, and he's kind of an interesting guy. He's pretty cute. There's a little picture of him if you scroll down here.
Mm-hmm.
His father, a bit of a mystery, so never in the picture at any rate. So his mother's name was Clemence Charwan.
Ooh.
It's French. don't exactly know how to pronounce it. It looks like Charowin. But she was born in France and came with her family to New York. And in the early census, it's her and little 2-year-old Captain Byron living with her parents and her siblings. So his father wasn't around from a very young age.
Wow.
And his grandfather was a guy, Victor Charwan, who allegedly fought with Napoleon, and he was sort of a colorful figure anyway.
Wow.
But some of his maternal relatives, including an uncle also named Victor, came to Whatcom early on in the 1870s and had a farm near Ferndale. And that guy, his uncle, Victor, his wife was named Olive Johnson, and she was a sister of Charles Larrabee's mother. Did you follow that?
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So they were all extended.
So this Victor guy, he was an uncle to both Charles Larrabee and Captain Byron, which I guess makes them sort of cousins-in-law or something.
Yeah, that's cool.
So Charles Larrabee, for those that don't know, he's that founding father figure of the town over in Fairhaven, our South Side neighborhood. He's got a little statue bust of his head over there. Anyway, Captain Byron had these ties in Whatcom County, but he had grown up mostly in Chicago, where he had been a tugboat captain on Lake Michigan. So in 1888, the Tacoma papers were reporting that he had come out here and was in Tacoma looking to start like a chain of tugboats and boats out here, steamboats and stuff. So I couldn't find whether that actually ever happened. I couldn't find any confirmation of that, but that seems to be what his intention was at first. And then what we do know is that in March of 1889, he was in the town of Seaholm planning to build this 3-story building on Dock Street. And by June of that year, it was reportedly nearly finished. The hotel in photos has the year 1889 painted on the sign at the top, but I don't know why. It took them a long time to open up because in March of 1890, the Reveille newspaper commented it ought to have been completed months ago. Something was holding up the progress, but it finally opened in April of 1890, and the Bellingham Bay Express reported that it was one of the latest hotels thrown open to the public, elegantly furnished, 75 rooms, best on the bay, dining room, and they all comment on it being located on high, dry ground and having good drainage.
What is that?
That tells you anything. It's not on the tide flats, I guess.
Oh
You're
my
not
God.
having the sewer come in and out with the tide underneath
Not
you.
far from the tide flats, but I guess far
It's
enough.
not too far, but it is on high ground.
It's hilarious. And 75 rooms is a lot.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And you can see these little ads here. There's one that comments it's strictly on the American plan, which I had to look this up. So there's the European plan and the American plan, which at the time it just meant if it's the American plan, it included 3 meals while you stayed there were part of what you paid for. And so now we're more familiar with the continental plan, which is what we have mostly in the US today, which is that cheesy free breakfast you get at most hotels.
Yeah.
But that was a thing back then. And it was kind of, I guess, a way for Americans at the time in that sort of Gilded Age era who were very wealthy. It was like, we have these meals included with our hotel stays. I don't know.
Interesting. Trying to one up the European.
Yeah, something like that. So yeah, the building's not really that exciting. As you can see, it's just kind of a 3-story rectangular wooden building. It's got some fun little decorative things along the roof line there, little wrought iron crusting. It's kind of a little Second Empire vibes, kind of a folk watered down version. And it's got a little sign at the top and a little flagpole. But it appears like he just let other people operate the hotel and he made regular trips back to Chicago. So he owned it.
Right.
Yeah, but other people ran it for him, and he sold it at some point, and then he bought it back again later. So he tends to live there when he comes to town, at least. But he was definitely going back to Chicago. Like he went and ran a boat there during the World's Fair in 1893.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So let's talk about some weird stuff that went on in the building.
Weird things. All right. So our first weird death on the hotel property occurred in January of 1898. The Tacoma Ledger had this to say, quote, Barney E. Lynch, principal owner of the Empire Shingle Mill at Saxon, Whatcom County, fell or jumped from a 3rd-story window of the Byron Hotel at 12 o'clock last night, striking head foremost on the sidewalk below. Oof, that's a really nice way to say it.
They didn't hold back.
went head first to the sidewalk.
Yeah.
They said the Empire Mills dry kiln and dry houses were burned recently, and Lynch had just settled with the insurance adjusters. He went to his room before the fatal plunge, being slightly intoxicated and acquiring the assistance of night clerk Ritzer to help him upstairs. The injured man never regained consciousness from the time of his fall, and whether he intended to commit suicide will always remain a mystery. Mr. Lynch leaves a widow and 3 children residing at Saxon. He has been a prominent lumberman and logger of Whatcom County for the past 8 years. So Saxon that they're referring to is out by Acme or Wickersham.
Yeah.
That's
Rough.
rough. Oh my gosh. So the dry kiln and dry houses at the mill had burned, so he was desperate.
So there was, I guess some people speculated maybe he was upset about that.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, it seemed like he had gotten good news from the insurance.
Yeah. That's
So,
interesting. Yeah, so there's various witnesses that were interviewed by the coroner, as well as his wife, Mrs. Lynch, and it seemed like the guy did not have any reason to commit suicide. Despite the mill burning, he'd also received good news from the insurance company, and he probably went out drinking to celebrate, and then... Oy.
yeah.
Yeah, so people in the room below said they heard him stumbling around before hearing the crash. Apparently there was a rocking chair in the room that had been moved in front of the window, and it was speculated that perhaps for some reason he tried to stand on it and fell through the window. Oh, poor Barney.
I know. I'm just like, what is this guy doing trying to stand on a rocking chair? But sounds like you've been a little drinking.
He's been a little tipsy.
Yeah, but rough, man. Fall through the window.
No.
3 stories
Head
down.
first. Yeah, that's weirdly. His oldest son was named Byron. Mm-hmm.
So that's a tragic story.
Okay, moving on.
So by November of 1899, Captain Byron decided to add this new annex to the building. So we're still doing a good business, and he wants more rooms. So on the lots uphill, so where the Leopold Tower is that we know of, this is what the lot we're talking about now. So he builds the annex there. And it's a little bit fancier of a building. It's made out of brick. It's kind of Italianate, fancier architectural style with elaborate cornice and its arched windows, and it's got the name Hotel Byron up at the top in the year 1900. And you can see in this picture, it's kind of a good one we'll put in the show notes. So it shows the original Byron, the wood frame building, and then the new annex. And then there's a little building next to it that matches it. And then up at the end of the block is one that we talk about a lot, the Lighthouse building, which was on the corner where today's Bank of America is, on the corner of Holly and Cornwall. And it was a big, beautiful, amazing building. But yeah, I love that it's just like the street is muddy and dirty looking, and you can see this little horse-drawn gurney cab with Hotel Byron painted on the side. So they would go pick up the patrons from the docks and the train stations. They noted in the ad as it was the headquarters for commercial travelers and for mill and mining men, and they had sample rooms in connection. So sample rooms in the 1900s, these luxury hotels offered these for traveling salesmen. It was like a place to display your products to potential buyers. The rooms were just kind of empty rooms with beds that could be stowed away anyway. And then also in early days of saloons, that term got used for saloons as well. It was a place where you could taste test liquor, and then it just kind of became another slang word for a saloon, the sample rooms, which I think is kind of fun.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. I had no idea. You could set up your little sample coffins and
yeah,
there, carpets, whatever.
Yeah. And it really was like quite a lifestyle, quite a whole thing of all these guys traveling around with their various goods and wares that they're trying to sell to local merchants and businesses and things.
Yeah, really interesting. All right, so getting into the early 1900s, we have an account by a guy who worked as a bellhop at the Byron House in the early 1900s, and he wrote to the Herald in 1967. He was inspired by recent news of the demolition of the 1913 Leopold wing, and his name was Harry B. Denton. He was then in his 70s and living in Kirkland. But he described that he had arrived in Bellingham in June of 1900 with his parents and siblings. Denton said, "I was hired as a bellboy in 1902 at the Hotel Byron. At this time, it was the best hotel in Bellingham. The old Byron Hotel had no rooms with running water and had gas light. They had washstands in each room with a big pitcher of water and a slop jar. For hot water, they had to call the bellboy. If I remember, the rates were $5 to $8, including meals. We had a 7-day-a-week job. The waiters and waitresses received $25 a month and their room and board, and I received $10 a month, tips, and my board and room. At this time, there were no autos, so the traveling public had to depend on boats and trains. The Great Northern Depot was built on pilings on the tide flats near the Seaholm Dock, where the boats moored from Seattle, Everett, and the islands. When the new addition was built, it was really modern for that time. It had 6 suites with bath and electric lights. A heating plant was installed. It was steam heat. The fuel used was slab wood, and I remember when they would get green slabs, it was hard to keep the hotel warm. At that time, there was no elevator. In 1906, the Byron Hotel put in an elevator, which was the second one in Bellingham. The Lighthouse building had installed the first one.
And I just have to note that I've seen a lot of different claims of the first elevator in Bellingham. And I feel like I need to spend some time figuring that out, but I'm not sure exactly what qualifies as an elevator. I think some references might be more like a freight elevator or something.
Sure.
And I know the Fairhaven Hotel had an elevator before this, and a guy died, got his head crushed in there
Oh,
in
no.
1890. It was right after it was built.
Huh.
So I guess it depends on if you're counting Fairhaven as part of
Exactly.
Bellingham or not. But it seems like I think people were pretty wary of elevators. I mean, and who would blame them when you could get your head crushed? Anyway, by 1906, it's all one big Bellingham. Anyway, yeah, it's a good thing they're getting elevators because they can't really build higher than a 3-story building.
No, true. If you're gonna get more money, you gotta get an elevator.
I like that he mentioned the lack of autos, but I thought it was interesting because Captain Byron was one of the very first people in town on the bay to have a horseless carriage. So in like 1903, he was one of the first to get some kind of auto, and then he had like a better model shipped out from Chicago in 1905.
And they were the only ones for quite a while, right?
Yeah, I mean, it started to really take off. Like between 1910 and 1920, it was like exponential automobiles going crazy.
Yeah, that's cool. Recall that in 1903, the towns had consolidated. So now we're officially talking about the town of Bellingham as one. And here's another promotional description of the Byron from 1906. It says, preeminent among the hotels in Bellingham is the Byron, which is centrally located and is the best hotel in Whatcom County and is possessed of every qualification necessary to a first-class hotel and is within easy access of all points of interest by the streetcars. There are 125 rooms, and they are all fitted up in a most thorough manner, are elegantly furnished and tastily decorated, and possessed of every modern convenience that will contribute to the pleasure and comfort of the guests. The bedrooms are large and light and airy, and furnished with the most comfortable beds that money can buy, and have a most homelike appearance. A small army of attendants are constantly on hand, giving the guests the best service, while a good bar and cigar and newsstand and sumptuous dining room are also operated in connection. At the bar will be found the finest wines and liquors of every kind, and the best mixed drinks are prepared by experienced and skilled barkeepers, while the celebrated Olympia beer is always on draft. All right, so yeah, notice that Olympia beer on draft. Thanks to Leopold Schmidt. And he comes into play here shortly on that same premises.
And yeah, so we're coming up into the year of 1910, which is a pivotal year in Bellingham. If you don't already know from our tours or listening to us, we'll get into the reasons why. But it was also a big year for Captain Byron. His mother died at Chicago, and he had been living in his hotel in Bellingham most of the time. And then he started leasing that hotel to beer brewer Leopold Schmidt. And in 1910, they came to a sale agreement in what was called the biggest real estate deal of the year. And I always imagine that they must have been buddies.
Good old Leo. Yeah, I imagine they were kind of buddies.
Well, and they had probably a connection, I would imagine, through Larrabee, because Leopold Schmidt was real tight with Larrabee, and they had known each other from Montana. And Captain Byron seemed like he was ready to move on to California and cruise around in his Winston 6 car. And Leopold Schmidt, well, let's talk about him.
Well, if you guys did not know, Leopold Schmidt was a German immigrant, and he was born there in January of 1846. He came to the United States first in the 1860s, just after the Civil War, and sailed on the Great Lakes, and then went to St. Louis and later Montana, working as a carpenter. Realizing that what the West could really use was some good German beer, he went back to the homeland to attend a brewer's school, at which time he met his wife and got married. The couple then returned to the U.S. in 1879 and lived in Montana, where he became a very successful brewing businessman. In 1895, he sold his Montana interests and moved to the Puget Sound to Olympia, where he was impressed by the river's pure artesian water. He opened a brewery there, of course, called the Capitol Brewery, but also had breweries in Bellingham, Salem, Oregon, and San Francisco. And he also invested in hotels and banks. The Schmidts raised their 6 children in a lovely house they built in Tumwater in 1904, which is now available as an event space.
Yeah, I thought it was a museum, but I guess it's just like kind of like you can rent it for weddings and stuff.
Schmidt established another brewery here in Bellingham in 1902, the 3B, or the Bellingham Bay Brewery, and it stood on the corner of Ohio and Ellis, which is near Bellingham High School where the food bank is today. It was an imposing 5-story structure with 100-foot-tall brick smokestack. It was state-of-the-art at the time of its construction and occupied an entire block of ground with storehouses and an ice plant, which is a pretty big deal. So old Schmitty supplied many saloons in Bellingham with the 3B beer. There were 30 saloons on Holly Street alone by 1910. But not everyone was happy with the profusion of saloons. But there was the so-called moral reform movement that had been growing for decades by this time, and we had the Anti-Saloon League and the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and we had the local option movement, which allowed municipalities or counties to vote to allow or disallow certain things within their borders. And at this time, it meant to vote to be either wet or dry towns. And this is how we got to this nationwide prohibition. It started out as this patchwork of sort of grassroots efforts to turn towns dry, and then states, and then of course we had nationwide prohibition by 1920. So all this is brewing in Bellingham, and we had the Municipal League forming to clean up the town. Evangelist Billy Sunday was coming to town preaching against booze and saloons. Pressure was being put on the city to shut down the red light district and regulate other immoral behaviors like gambling and drinking alcohol. So Leopold Schmidt, in the face of all that, tried to dangle the promise of a fancy new hotel to be built only if local option law did not pass. The paper says, Brewer announces that he will proceed to build this season if local option in this city does not carry. A 4-story hotel building will be erected on the property if the local option election does not carry. Mr. Schmidt is one of the biggest brewery men in the state, and if the saloons are voted out of the city, he says he cannot afford to invest in a large hotel building. And spoiler alert, womp womp. Local option did pass. Effective January 1st, 1911. We went dry, and poor old Schmitty, he had to eat words just a little bit.
Yeah, he did. And that is a really good question of, why did he go ahead with the hotel, even though it passed? So we have a lot of theories on that, but it's not completely clear. Leopold's wife passed away in February of 1911, and that was said to have really affected him also. So he's just getting terrible news left and right. And the hotel plans were put on hold, but only briefly. So he did go ahead with the hotel. And There was this sort of brewery beer loopholes, right, with local options. So at first, you could still consume beer at home, and people were stockpiling, and that might have boosted sales a little bit temporarily or something. But he seemed to hold out hope that things would reverse. And in December 1911, the paper said, quote, Leopold Schmidt, president of the Byron Hotel Company, who arrived in the city this morning, declares that plans for a new 7-story hotel building have been approved, and in all probability, work on the new structure will be completed in the spring. So he was also quoted himself as saying, I am frank to say that the building of the new hotel is contingent upon our receiving some encouragement. There is no use beating around the bush, and by that expression I mean that in this modern day and age, a hotel, to fulfill modern requirements, must be in a position to permit a guest to regale himself with a glass of wine if he so chooses. Now, I differ from a great many men who are engaged in the brewery business, as it is generally known I am. I do not favor a wide open town. I believe in a strictly regulated town with respect to the saloon traffic, but I do not believe in a Puritan blue town law. The hotel, when completed, will be a 7-story structure, modern, fireproof, and up-to-date in every particular, a building that will add materially to the realty values of the city, and a building of which all persons will be proud. So it's kind of interesting because it sounds like he's really like, come on. Like, can we turn this around? And we know that he put that saloon in there, which didn't end up getting to serve alcohol at all. But it was like he was hoping it was going to swing back the other direction. But by late April of 1913, they announced that they hope to have the hotel ready for a big opening in May. And they said, there is little doubt the Leopold will stand as one of the most handsome hotels in the Puget Sound country, modern and comfortable in every detail. So they were rushing to finish on time the building, and they were tearing down the old Byron House in September of 1912. So it took them a couple of years, though, to complete it, sadly, very dry years. But in 1913, the Hotel Leopold is born, the first incarnation of it. That is not called the Byron. So now we get the renaming of the Leopold Hotel as the Leopold. And it had its opening May 24th, 1913. So this new building was U-shaped, and again, I call this the Twin Towers. I don't know why, that's just my nickname for it. So here it is pictured next to the Annex, which is now, they've renamed the Leopold Annex. So it had been the Byron Annex, but now altogether they've got 200 rooms. And the new towers they didn't make it to 7. I guess they're only 5 stories. And the old Annex was just 3.
There she is. She is beautiful.
So we've got our hotel.
All brick makes a huge difference. It's crazy how it changes the look of that block.
It sure does. You can see why they're like modern, most modern.
There's all these little cars everywhere. It's a huge difference. Crazy. But it still looks kind of small. Really fun to look at.
Yeah, it's not the Leopold we know.
Really cool, okay, so the local papers described the new hotel. They said, the big main lobby, entered through a white-tiled vestibule, is a revelation in handicraft. From local lumber mills, the builders secured exquisitely grained fir, which is triple veneered into a satin finish. The walls and ceilings are heavily beamed with a handsome wood. The halls are wide and richly carpeted. Every guest chamber is strictly modern and fireproof in every respect. There was furniture of Circassian walnut and bird's eye maple, beds of a massive brass design, deep ideal springs, and 50-pound hair mattresses. Woo! At this time, a mattress could be stuffed with anything, obviously, yes, from corn husks to leaves, moss, wool, cotton, and believe it or not, hair was the high-end mattress of the time, mostly horsehair.
We think.
That's interesting.
Right?
And itchy.
Yeah, I know.
I hope it was really good.
Right? I'm like, is it poking through? I hope there's some good batting of some sort between the hair and your body.
50 pounds? 50 pound hair mattress.
Yeah.
All right. Well, they said every room had hot and cold running water and steam heat with splendid shaving combination stands with bracket lights and beveled mirrors and handy nickeled hook or razor strops for the male patrons. Also, apparently, upon each floor, public ladies' and gentlemen's toilets and public bathrooms are provided, equipped with a new system of plumbing. Several of the rooms also have concealed toilets in specially built closets. That's luxury. So you may have been sharing a toilet, but there was a telephone in every room. A modern switchboard connects every room direct with a long distance communication. Throughout the hotel is equipped with vacuum cleaning pipes and plugs so that all the maids have to do when they wish to clean carpets is telephone to the engineer and attach the cleaner to the plug in the floor. Wow.
I'm still stuck on the secret toilets
Yeah,
or whatever.
closets.
Concealed toilets.
They have their own room for a toilet.
And only some deluxe room. It's so weird. And then of course, yeah, like the maids like got a call down to the engineer to be like, turn on the vacuum.
Turn on the vacuum, yeah, so it'll suck the shit down. That's so funny. Is that easier? I don't know.
It sounds complicated.
That's fancy though. Oh, there was a 20-passenger elevator.
Yeah.
And that would be run by an elevator operator. Of course, we'd have our little bellboy guy in there. There was also a gentleman's card and billiard room. And of course, attached to the hotel are the sanitarium baths operated by C.D. Threkeld under the Battle Creek methods. The place is splendidly equipped for both sexes and operated by graduate nurses who know their business. That's good. We do have stories about the sanitarium baths in an earlier episode.
Yep, Sanitarium Insanity.
Sanitarium Insanity, that was the one.
They moved into the Leopold and they were in there 50 years.
There were 5 porters and 5 bellhops. And for those who don't know, porters are the outside workers and the bellhops typically work inside the hotel. So porters would be helping carry luggage inside, where bellhops' main job was storing and retrieving it. Porters also ran errands outside the hotel for guests, like delivering papers. The golden age of bellhops spans the late 1800s to the mid-1900s. The picture in your mind is the iconic figure with the tailored uniform and the little pillbox hat became synonymous with luxury hotel service. And nowadays, it has changed, and we have the concierge service filling these roles. They also mentioned that the old horse-drawn omnibus, which has met every train and boat arriving in Bellingham for many years, will be discarded. A new automobile will replace it. Charles Cox, known as Charlie to thousands of commercial men, after holding the reins over his team for many years, will find himself face to face with the problems of a chauffeur and will greet his old friends with a new conveyance in keeping with the sumptuousness of the hostelry. That's a mouthful. So Charlie was driving the old horsey guy, and now he's switching over.
Yeah, now he gets to drive a bus. Yeah, it's real cute. There's pictures of it. We'll put some of them in there. They look like a weird little, it almost looks like they just converted it. They're like, put an engine on this wagon. It's real cute. And there are various, over the years, different ones that they always had, using to pick up guests from the train stations and the docks. So November 3rd, 1913, the Herald reported that Leopold Schmidt made his first visit to the hotel since its completion. So he was coming direct from this 14-month trip he was on through the South Seas in Europe with his daughter. And this little tidbit I found interesting because I always make fun of these guys naming hotels after themselves, like Byron and Leopold and so forth. But it turns out that Leopold, he didn't know they were going to do it. It was the people working for him, his sons and his right-hand man, Henry Shoup, who came up with that idea to name it in his honor. And they said in the paper, quote, Mr. Schmidt was unaware that the new hotel would bear his name until he received photographs and stationery announcing the fact. Mm-hmm. He is not altogether pleased either, and said this morning that he had planned to have the hotel either named after some old historic settler or by some name which would indicate the geographical location. Mm-hmm. So he wasn't really that stoked that they named it after him. But he was happy with the hotel, and he was like, yep, it's better than I anticipated. It's great. It's fully up to anything I've seen in my travels. He said, perhaps it is hard for me to make an unbiased statement on this because I am now home again, and the other beautiful places I have seen did not represent home. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of sweet. He thought of Bellingham and the Pacific Northwest in general as as his home.
That's nice.
And yeah, according to friends, like his health had been kind of failing and he'd been down since the death of his wife in 1911. And so I think his daughter had taken him on that trip to Europe to kind of try to cheer him up and for his health. And he had been kind of increasingly handing over business to his sons and really kind of preparing to step back and retire. But so after he comes back from this trip and he spends most of his time in Bellingham at the new hotel instead of at the family house down in Tumwater. And I imagine, his children are mostly adults. They're all grown. His wife is passed. So yeah, he's probably just happier to be in the hotel. Okay, so the papers announced that the Grim Reaper lays hand on city again. Leopold Schmidt answers the final call suddenly. Death comes in home at hotel bearing his name. So it is where he was when he passed away here in 1914. They said, death called Leopold Schmidt, one of the builders of Bellingham, financial power throughout the Northwest, at the Leopold Hotel here at 11 o'clock last night. He was 68 years old, and they said that death was due to valvular heart trouble. And his sons and friends were with him in the apartments when he had symptoms. And, they called doctors and did everything they could, but it was no good. And the Morning Olympian commented that, quote, his sudden death is believed to be partly due to the shock from the death of C.X. Larrabee of Bellingham, who succumbed to heart failure a few days ago, the two having been close personal and business friends. On the day of the death of Larrabee, Mr. Schmidt had been invited to spend the evening with him, and it was only when he appeared at the door of the Larrabee home that he learned of the death a few minutes before of his friend. Oh, so that's why they were like, Grim Reaper lays hand on city again in the headline, because you had a bunch of sort of high-profile dudes die right in a row. We had Larrabee and then Leopold, and then you also had Jacob Beck, who ran the Grandview Hotel and Saloon just up the street. He died on the same day as Leopold Schmidt earlier in the morning. So it's kind of weird and eerie that all these guys kind of kicked off right in a row. And they said also at the time of his death, Leopold was reputed to be worth many millions. They said, although like his warm personal friend, the late C.X. Larrabee, he was always reticent about himself and his finances and averse to publicity and interviews. So he does seem to have kind of been a modest guy that didn't want a lot of, hubbub around him. And that's probably why he wasn't that stoked about the hotel getting named after him. But I thought it was interesting. A few weeks later, they commented in the papers that the value of the estate was a third less than it would have been if the state had voted wet instead of dry. So, yeah, that brewery was worth a lot more money if he could actually make beer. Yeah. So some say old Schmitty died of a broken heart between the loss of his wife and the depressing march of prohibition. I mean, that would stress any beer brewer's heart.
Yeah.
But in November of 1914, so this is just a month or two later after his death, Washington State votes to completely prohibit the manufacture and sale of alcohol statewide. That was bad news for the brewery, which would soon turn into a dairy plant.
Yeah. Makes sense.
But yeah, Schmidt's sons and his right-hand man, who's Henry Shoup, would continue managing his Leopold's interests and operate the hotel for many years.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I'm so sad. I think
it's interesting because Larrabee was a real teetotaler. He did not drink. He did not allow alcohol in the Fairhaven Hotel, which people said was a terrible business strategy.
But they were good buddies, and that's just so interesting. And maybe I'm romanticizing just a little too much, but it does seem like Leopold had some like ideals and things, and was a philanthropist as well. Seemed like a good dude, but also, during this time, and we've talked about on our tours too, this is a time, where World War I is taking the stage, and there's a lot of xenophobia and feelings around Germans, and it's really, really sad and hard. But we did have a couple of, Larrabee and Leopold and J.J. Donovan, who seem to have some pretty cool standards. as far as that kind of stuff went.
Yeah. Well, and I think, there was a lot of Germans in and around Bellingham, and I think it was just considered part of
Yeah.
the culture and daily life. You were drinking your beer, and it wasn't like they were getting wasted, but you had it just with your
Yeah.
meals, and it was just part of
Yeah.
daily living. Yeah, so I think they were like, well, what is the problem? Like we just want to have our
This
beer.
is something that we've been doing for hundreds, thousands of years. So what are we? Yeah.
Yes. So this like weird, American puritanical culture that had really mushroomed up during this time is really
Yeah.
at
Well,
odds.
leave it to Americans to fuck it up for everyone,
I know, right? Thanks, Puritans.
Oh,
Oh
Jesus.
gosh.
All right.
But yeah, so maybe Leopold haunting around in there.
I hope so, but in a peaceful way. I hope he got to pass
Yeah.
on and left the haunting to some of those other crazies.
Right. Yes.
He lived a good life and loved his wife and got to go be with her in the great beyond. Okay, well, let's see. So before we wrap up the episode, though, we have one more weird German dude who died in the hotel. This guy might be haunting. And his name was Count Gustav Edelbutel. Edelbutel?
Yes. Picture an umlaut on the U, so that makes it
Edelbutel Reimers. Edelbutel
yeah.
Reimers. Wow, that's a good name. Well, in 1915, a man was found in his room in the hotel, dead of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He left a letter to the hotel manager, Henry Shoup, along with a suitcase filled with documents, letters, and technical drawings. The circumstances around his life and death were peculiar and fueled speculation. April 8, 1915, a huge front-page headline read, "German Count ends life at hotel." And they said in the paper that Count Gustav Rudolf Edelbutel Reimers, the aeronautical inventor who had made several attempts to build and operate a hydroplane on a Lake Whatcom during the last 4 years, committed suicide in a room at the Leopold Hotel last night by sending 2 bullets through his heart. The body was discovered by an employee of the hotel today. Reimers made extensive preparation for his act. He folded a blanket of his own upon the bed and then lay down on this. He also placed a towel under his head. No one in the hotel heard the report of the shots that brought death. But when hotel employees entered the room, they found a .32 caliber automatic revolver clasped in the dead man's hand. He had held the weapon close to his body and sent 2 shots directly through his heart. Reimers wore a neat suit with white dress shirt and low-cut vest. It was the neatest job of killing I ever knew of, Chief of Police Callahan said after viewing the remains. Much mystery has surrounded the presence of Reimers at his Rocky Ridge home on Lake Whatcom, and he failed to leave any letter or document that explained why he exiled himself in this part of the country and refused to make friends with his neighbors or discuss his plans with them. Woo! Yeah, he's a suspicious fellow, but with good reason. Reimers had left a letter for Henry Shoup, the hotel manager, and in it he gave instructions for Shoup to sell his property and pay his debts. He included instructions to tip out the maid and the waiter at the hotel who had served him. He also asked Shoup to send his blueprints to the United States Signal Corps of San Diego. This was the precursor to what we now know as the United States Air Force. Today known as Rockwell Field, an airfield on the Coronado Peninsula. This was where they were training the very first military pilots at the time. So early days of planes and piloting, and he's got some interesting things. So in the letters, Reimers also called Shoup his only friend left in the world. Shoup said he only knew Reimers a few days and only interacted with him as much as he would any other hotel guest. He said he was at a loss as to why Reimers selected him to look after his affairs. Reimers' birth name was Gustav Rudolf Edelbutel. In his declaration to become a citizen, filed in 1908, Reimers said he was born in Harburg, Germany, on September 28, 1874. He had traveled all over the world, leaving a trail of passenger lists. But then he had come to Whatcom County in 1910 and bought a small farm at Rocky Ridge on Lake Whatcom. Rocky Ridge is between Strawberry Point and Dutch Harbor on Lake Whatcom, between the Geneva and Sudden Valley neighborhoods. He built a hangar and a workshop, for building hydroplanes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is totally crazy to me. So I had to get into it a little bit because hydroplanes in 1910. So we're talking the Wright brothers had their flight in 1903. And so it's right around 1910 when experiments with hydroplanes were very first happening. So the Wright brothers were doing this, trying to build hydroplanes. Glenn Curtiss and other people were as well. And part of the reason why having a plane that could take off and land on water was desirable was because there weren't airfields yet. Like airplanes were so new, they didn't really build airports or airfields. So finding open flat spaces to land your airplane just were, when you needed one, it was a challenge. And since bodies of water have lots of room and are flat, if you could land a plane on them, then that's kind of solves a lot of those problems.
Wow.
So everyone was trying to invent these hydroplanes, including this dude, this Edelbutel guy. So while he resides on Lake Whatcom, it's said that he built 3 different hydroplanes while he was living there.
Crazy.
And 2 of them he wrecked on the lake. In July of 1914, papers reported that the aviator plunges into Lake Whatcom and described his narrow escape from death. However, in the article, it sounded like Reimers was just like, cool, this is great. I'm making progress on my plane.
To be expected, yeah.
And then he was always written about in the papers. They always said he was mysterious, and they always commented on how secretive he was. And they said he never allowed outsiders to visit him at his property, and he guarded the machines as if he feared someone would attempt to duplicate his patterns.
Yeah.
And so he had patented a handful of airplane parts that he had invented. And papers mentioned that the Curtiss company, so this guy Glenn Curtiss, he was sort of like in big wars with the Wright brothers and patent wars and all this stuff. They were just all the early airplane guys. And this Curtiss, he gets the military contracts and he's negotiating apparently with Edelbutel for the use of some of these inventions.
Oh, wow.
So this is like pretty big deal.
Big deal. Yeah.
Reimers, it's so hard to tell, like, is he crazy? Is he genius?
Yeah.
Is he a little bit of both? He had written this letter to Mayor D'Amatos, which they published in the paper, which said, "Your Honor, permit me to make you a statement. It seems to me that my personal enemies are trying to throw a base suspicion upon me, favored by the present political conditions. If anything of this matter has come to your knowledge, I should be glad to answer to you," and blah, 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 blah. But he says, "At the present time, I'm not able to furnish anything intelligible for my suspicion. I trust upon your discretion." So it sounds like he's kind of like weirdly paranoid, that people are after him. He's got these enemies and politics. And the Herald commented on this, and they were kind of like, yeah, maybe he had some kind of, quote, aberration of the mind. But did he? Or, I don't know. It's giving a little bit autism spectrum, perhaps. They described him as being a fiend for system. Like he loved everything to be just so and very orderly.
Sure.
And, that is pretty common, I think, for the engineer types. But I just also wanted to point out that less than a year before his death, so that's when World War I was kicked off in July of 1914 with assassination of old Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia, and then Germany declares war on Russia and France and Britain on Germany. And so in January of 1915, Germany was protesting that the U.S. was shipping hydroplanes to quote-unquote belligerents. And so they were mad that the U.S., specifically the Curtiss Company, was selling planes to England and Russia, who Germany was now at war with. So they were trying to get planes classified as war vessels under the Hague Conventions because, like, they hadn't been invented.
Yeah.
So it was all just new. People were like, we're going to make some money on this war business.
Sure. But yeah.
But
and
isn't that crazy?
there was a wartime atmosphere of protectedness and traitorism and all of that kind of stuff. So, I mean, maybe he wasn't.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And so he's German.
He was already German.
But he's in the U.S. Is he a spy? He's inventing these plane parts and giving them to the Americans. But like,
Yeah.
Why did he kill himself?
Oh, that's so crazy. All right, well, okay, so the day after Reimer's death, the Herald printed a follow-up headline, Reimer's life shrouded in mystery. German who ended life succeeded as engineer and was not without funds, had letters of military character. Why did Count Gustav R. Edelbutel Reimers remain in the United States? The German who yesterday took his life at a local hotel was a genius. A search of his belongings today proves this beyond question. His standing in his native country was high. He had money and position. Yet he exiled himself on his little farm at Rocky Ridge, Lake Whatcom, and attempted to hide from the world. Why? Crazy. Oh, yeah, Drafts, photographs, and official documents found in Reimer's suitcase show that he has visited all parts of the world. He had spent much time in Mexico, China, Calcutta, and England. On March 7th, 1908, he obtained a passport for the German government and came to the United States. He was not exiled from his native land, but came as a representative, Verein Deutscher Ingenieur, which was an association of German engineers, the leading German engineer society, to investigate mines and mining in the United States. On completing this work, he did not return to Germany. Instead, he came to Bellingham, purchased land at Rocky Ridge, and exiled himself. But why? Letters of a military nature were found in Reimer's suitcase. These are apparently from an English infantry captain in charge of a post in India, asking Reimers to explain why he visited a certain place when instructed not to do so. Was he a spy? Was he sent to this country to obtain information for his government? Since establishing himself at Rocky Ridge, he obtained 3 patents from the United States government and 1 trademark. These patents he leaves behind unsold, although they are said to be worth considerable money. To the United States Aviation School, he bequeaths an elaborate set of aeronautical plans said to be worth hundreds of dollars, with detailed data concerning the working of aerial craft from actual experiments and volumes of books dealing with these questions. They commented on it being strange to end his life when he had done all of this diligent hard work and seemed poised on further success. They commented also that he was not lacking in funds. Quote, Reimers recently refused an offer of $500 for his property at Rocky Ridge, and a few days ago refused to consider an offer for his hydroplane engine. He had a position awaiting him as a draftsman with T.F. Doane, the architect. A shortage of funds could not have caused him to take his life. They said Reimers was a picture of health. No medicine was found to indicate that he was unhealthy. He was 41 years of age and active in life. Recently had dental work done, which would totaled $75 in value, so he could not have contemplated suicide long. They speculated on whether he might have been a German spy who failed to fulfill his mission and gone into exile in Whatcom. However, they didn't really make sense because he kept his name. Reimers was his mother's maiden name, which he had said he adopted in the U.S. because it was easy to pronounce. He had also received many letters from relatives in Germany who appeared to know of his whereabouts. He didn't really seem to be concealing his identity. So they're grasping for straws. The Herald speculated that perhaps he was disappointed in love, having never married.
I like this. They're like, could he be a spy? Blah, blah, blah. Like, they're going through all these reasons, like motives for suicide, and they're like, we don't know. Perhaps he's just upset because he's never been married.
He's just sad because he wants love. Okay, cool.
Right.
That is interesting though, because he has so much money. Oh man, who knows? Poor guy.
Yeah, I know. It's real weird. And then there's this last little bit.
Yeah.
So a week or so later, Henry Shoup filed another letter written by Reimers with the courts that appointed him the administrator of the estate. And they published it in the newspaper again, raising questions like, was this guy paranoid? Was he a spy?
Right.
So this is a condensed version, but it said, Dear Mr. Shoup, I am sorry that this should happen in your hotel. It is not my fault, though, but that of the Americans who are not able to dispose of this matter rapidly and quietly. It seems to me it caused them a great exertion, and it is too bad that a German family and their followers should be connected with such dirty work. I do not mean that the work is dirty, but the ways and means. I was here in this country with the honest intention of becoming an American citizen, although I did sing German patriotic songs in my own dwelling. This was cunningly used by my personal enemies. I beg of you, Mr. Shoup, to take into hand my affairs and regulate the same. I beg you to do your best to keep this matter out of the newspapers. Well, he failed there. I would like to be cremated. Da, 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 da. He didn't want a minister. He didn't want church. And he regretted again to bother him with this matter. And he says, it is the outcome of the unbloody and peaceful methods of the Americans. Just one shot earlier would have made less noise. Many good wishes to you. Thanking you ahead of time.
Oh.
Gustav R. Eitelbutel Reimers. Weird.
It's so cryptic.
It is very weird. And I mean, it kind of begs, like, I guess Henry Shoup is just kind of mystified and I guess allows these letters to be published. But it does make me wonder, like, what did Henry Shoup know? Was he playing dumb? Did he know more that he was letting on here? He's German also.
Yeah, 100%. That is so interesting. The outcome of the unbloody and, quote, peaceful methods of the Americans. It's so crazy. One shot earlier would have made less noise.
Yeah, what is he talking about?
I don't know. This guy. What a mystery.
It's almost like sad. Like, I hope he was a spy. Because if he wasn't, then that's just depressing. Like, he's just weirdly paranoid, and World War I is fueling his paranoia. But yeah. I hope he was some kind of spy. Although it would seem like with the letters they mentioned, it seemed like he might be working for England.
Right.
When they're like, why did you go to this place when we didn't tell you to or something? So.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. Man, Edelbutel. Wow, it's all very, very fascinating. And that he knew how to make it clean and not disrupt anybody, but
yeah,
that's interesting. It was something that he'd already contemplated, obviously.
Yeah, he really planned it out and thought of all the little details.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah. So definitely there's some German-speaking ghosts in the hotel.
Yeah. We covered all of the German ones. Do we know where Reimers was staying? Like in which tower, or if it's still...
It would have been in the Twin Towers. So that is interesting to me because that's where Leopold died. That's where the Byron House was originally. Like, all of the deaths we talked about would have been on that side, which is actually the hotel wing. It's like the more modern mid-century wing, that's the majority of the hotel rooms currently are there. And there was a lot of talk about when they were, doing the renovating and stuff of activity in that area. So I think it's kind of like, it's maybe like Fairhaven, where even when there's new buildings built over the old spaces, there's some kind of energy lingering.
Yeah.
So something's going on over there.
Yeah. All right. Well, want to wrap her up?
Yes. So the stories we talked about today all took place in, these structures that have been replaced by more recent facilities, but you never know. I think maybe Captain Byron and Leopold Schmidt might be enjoying some ghost beers. I think at any rate, whether they're haunting or not, they're probably happy to see the hotel back in action as a hotel, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, I think so. They both, stuck around for this community and
And I mean, the retirement home, beautiful as it is, their vision was more like what the Leopold is now, this place of public gathering that's kind of opulent and fancy and things like that. So to me, I think they'd be pretty pleased with the current state of things.
I think so.
And then, there's probably some more recently departed spirits as well from the retirement home years.
Plenty.
I like to think that there's some golden girl granny ghosts just living their best lives up high in the Leopold.
Yep, I'm sure there are.
So, I mean, we have a lot more ghost stories. We've heard stories from employees and people living in the building. So you can come on down to our Gore and Lore tours and we'll fill you in on some of those. And the ghosts they're haunting. They are haunting the mid-century wing. They are haunting the ballroom. They are in the bathrooms. It's a fun place to explore. Bring your ghost apps on your phone. For the most part, the ghosts do seem quite friendly.
I like how you added that, for the most part.
I mean, I've never encountered any unfriendly ghosts, so.
No, I like the space. I don't get any bad feelings.
No, it's got good vibes.
Yeah, no, totally.
Also, we will be posting stupid clips of us playing with ghosts in the Leopold Hotel, so stay tuned for that.
I mean, I had a craft night. Leopold. Okay, well, let's see here. We got some announcements here to wrap her up. We are winding down our spooky season as this comes out. So with our gore and lore tours, our most popular tours, that if you come on our downtown tours, you get to see the Hotel Leo, and then you'll get some drink specials at the Amendment 21 bar in the hotel. We'll be doing lots of those tours, both downtown and in Fairhaven over the next few weeks leading up to Halloween. And then we have a very special event, which we are calling Spirits at Spark, a history seance experience. So join us if you dare for a historical seance experience on Halloween night. We'll attempt the feats of illusion popular at the time, call upon famous spiritualists and skeptics alike, and take a historical peek behind the crystal ball to uncover the secrets of the past and the science of speaking with the beyond. I am so stoked for this. Before the seance begins, journey through the museum with a host of haunting experiences and magical mysteries awaiting around every corner. There's going to be close-up magic by none other than John Walton in the museum galleries, a complimentary snack bar, heyo, specialty cocktails, heyo, wine and beer for sale sponsored by Gruff Brewing, woo woo, and Chuckanut Bay Distillery, another woo woo. God, these are all of our favorite people. All the tickets and sales, drink sales, and donations will go to support the Spark Museum and Wonder Lab. And prizes will be awarded for the best costume. Holy moly. So come dressed to impress. This is our event, you guys. This is like, if you like the Good Time Girls, you're gonna love this night at Spark. Big time, looking forward to it. If you haven't been to Spark, this is a perfect time to acquaint yourself with the museum. But the donations, I assure you, will go to a fantastic cause.
It's definitely one of our favorite places in Bellingham.
100%. If you like history, you'll love Spark. And this is going to be hosted by none other than Sarah, who many of you have probably met on a tour this year. She's been working her little booty off, always the best dressed of the Good Time Girls, and she's done a shitload of research, and this is going to be epic. So, and then you'll get to see all of us just kind of hanging around and
assisting.
Yeah. And it'll be super fun. So it's on Halloween night, October 31st from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. at the Spark Museum on Bay Street. Tickets are on sale now. Links in our show notes or on the website or on Spark's website. Please do note this event includes a vaudeville-style performance of a seance and no actual attempts to contact the dead will be made. That's a very good aside. This event is 21 plus and meant for education and entertainment.
I also want to mention that cemetery tours filled up quickly and we do have to reserve those in advance and it's complicated, so we can't just add more. So if you missed out on those, we do have a virtual cemetery tour via Zoom presentation scheduled through Bellingham Parks and Recreation later in November. That will be on November 20th, 7 p.m. We like to do these because not everyone can make it out to the cemetery and walk around, and when it gets cold and dark and rainy, you can just listen to me talk about the history of the cemetery from the comfort of your couch with your Snuggie and your glass of wine. So that will also be linked.
I love it. Yeah, don't miss that. Colby has a wealth of information and they're so fun, even to just listen to. And then you can take yourself on a little tour.
That's right.
And then do we have a plug for Chuck, who does the downtown Bellingham ghost tour?
Yes, we do. Our good friend Charles Crook. If you are into the ghost hunting, definitely check out Bellingham Ghost Tours with Charles. And he's got tours going on all month as well. Highly recommend.
Highly recommend. All right, you guys, with that, we're going to say goodnight for now. Until next time, when we'll have part 2 of the Leopold Hotel history. Thanks, guys, for listening to Belling History with the Good Time Girls.
Well, hey there, mama, where'd you go? You gotta reap just what you sow. That's too bad, too bad. To that old time, the old man hicks without bad weather. Put on the side, they were sewn together. That's too bad to listen to that old time music.
Yes, if you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platforms. Check out our show notes at bellinghistory.com. If you find yourself in Bellingham, check out our tours. You can also find and follow us on all the social medias.
Oh, Lou loves you red, Lou loves you blue. Most of the time, Lou just loves you blue. That's too bad to listen to that old time music. I lost my hat, I lost my brim. I look like a crow's nest swinging on a limb. That's too bad.
We'd like to thank the Devon Champlin and the late great Lucas Hicks for the use of the Gallus Brothers song Too Bad West Coast Blues. You can find the Gallus Brothers and Devon Champlin tunes on Bandcamp, and you can also find Devon at Champlin Guitars in downtown Bellingham.
Lost my hat, lost my brim, looking like a crow's nest, swinging from a limb. That's too bad, too bad. Well, I got no bugging, I got no smokes. I look like Grandpap and all of his folks. That's too bad to listen to that old time music.
Tune in next time for more Belling history.
Woo.